Well, good morning. A lot of you have met me before. One thing I should say about infoRouter that I do point out when I'm either doing pre-sales demonstrations or training is everything that Ed has spoken about and talked about is standard in infoRouter. It's not like us showing you the bells and whistles and saying, well, that option costs £3,000 more, this is £2,000 more. Everything is within infoRouter. So everything we've talked about is, if you've got infoRouter, it's in there. This is quite a short session, probably take about 10 minutes, if that. It's going through the latest version of infoRouter 8.3. There's some enhancements in there, so if you are an infoRouter user at the moment and haven't updated over the last few months, hopefully this will encourage you to update on there. So
that's my mouse.
Yes, if I get the right mouse. Okay, right. I've just got a few basic areas I'm going to touch on. HTML5 is the first one. Then we're going to look at a couple of the additional features that have been added to the workflow. Document listing, setting columns as a default. The live update, that's been redesigned a lot. And something that Ed touched on earlier, retention and disposition schedules. Right, first, HTML5. 8.3 has been redesigned, so we're using HTML5 standard, which tends to be replacing things like Flash. I've put Microsoft Internet Explorer benchmark. That is the benchmark for browser activity. So if it doesn't do something right in Internet Explorer, then we can put that right on there. HTML5 is the latest technology standard, and we find that when people are using tablets, depending on the tablets, then the websites will look very similar, if not the same, to laptops. Obviously, with different tablets, they're using different browser technology. And on Ed's last slide, he did talk about tablets and compatibility with that. But I think some of you that are using things like Firefox and Chrome have found that the pages do look very similar to those that you would have on a Internet Explorer browser. So that's one area. Workflow. Again, Ed touched on this, and I've just got traditionally with workflow has been in infoRouter since the early days, and it's been added to. The latest enhancement, as Ed mentioned, was once the document's approved, you can pass it through into a library or into a folder. In this case, I don't know if you can see that, I've set up a library called Purchasing, and I've got a subfolder called Supplier Invoices Processed. Obviously, with something like that, you could subscribe people to that folder, so when something's approved, they will get notified. There are also subscriptions where you can notify people automatically. Also within there's the ability to move. Let's put these through here and get over this one. Okay. As you probably know with workflows, they're made up of steps, and within those steps there's tasks. Each step can move the document from one folder to another, which means that if you are overviewing a workflow process, you can go into a folder and see where things are. Now, on saying that, what we're talking about here is physically going into a folder. With infoRouter, you can actually see the workflow status of any document, and that will tell you where it is. So it could be that it's been approved at the first step, or there's comments, and it's with the next person for approval. So you know whereabouts in that line of approval the documents reside in. Okay. Associated tasks. Now within a workflow you have a button called Create Associated Task. Now, the example I tend to mention on this is a situation with workflows. When I'm running through workflows and when we're doing training on workflows, I tend to go back to what would happen if it was paper. And with an associated task, and apologies to Phil on this because his name mentioned on here, this is a workflow. So I've been passed this document for approval. I look at it and look at the pricing and think, well, that's only 20% discount. I thought this company gives us 25. I might lean over to my boss, Phil Carson, and say, is this right? And he'll say, yeah, that's fine. We approve it. 3 months down the line, the MD comes along and goes, who approved this? I said, well, hold on. Phil said that was 20%. He approved it. And Phil could be sitting there and going, I don't know. I don't recall that. This is just a way of saying, the workflow starts from here, it's passed to this person, that person, it's paid. If it gets to this point and you want some more information, and more importantly, you want that information recorded, so, 3 months down the line, the MD going, who authorised this? There's a set of procedures you can go back and say, well, hold on, we passed that on because Phil Carson in this case said, yes, 20%, that's okay to approve it. And I think a lot of the time with the workflow, in a simple serial workflow like this, a lot of it is, to put it bluntly, covering the procedure so that if it's noted 3 months down the line, right, so who paid this invoice, you can point to a set of procedures within the company that have been approved at board level, that a supplier invoice comes in, for example, and it goes through these people, they comment, they approve, finally we make a backs payment to them, and there's an audit trail there we can go back on. Okay. And more importantly, as I said, the ad hoc task is listed. So we will actually have this task name ad hoc. So in this case, we've got a step 1. I've sent associated task to Phil, he's replied to it. I've got all his comments, so if anybody questions me in months to come, once that supplier has been paid, then we have an audit trail there to come back on. Document list. Traditionally, we've had the same default columns, and at folder level you could change it, but we have a lot of cases where people said it'd be great if we could just have the versioning as a default and the workflow status. You can now, if you excuse me, upgrade to version 8.3, your existing infoRouter. Excuse me. On the control panel, there's a button at the bottom called Document List, and if you go into there, you will see a select column. Similar to how you would select the columns at individual folder level, but this is at a global level. So in this case, you're selecting a number of columns from the left-hand side and adding them to the right. So in this instance, we've added workflow status and version. And I don't know if you're aware of this, if you click on any of the columns and there's an orange underline on there, that basically means, a bit like Windows Explorer, if you click on that column, it will sort that column ascending or descending order, which can be very useful if you've got several pages of data in a folder. If you click on modified, obviously you can bring today's date or the latest documents to the front within there. And as I said, this sets the default, but it doesn't take away the actual option within each folder to select the columns you want for that folder. Live update. If you're on the same version, it'll allow you to run it still as a repair function, which wasn't in earlier versions. This is quite a good one from Active Innovation's point of view. In all the documentation, if you run live update, what you must do is take backups. Here, if you tick all of those, you've got to tick all of those and say yes. So you have been warned about backups. very belt and braces. You know, I would recommend the backing up of the documents. Most of our sites either have a constant backup or a daily backup of the infoRouter warehouse, the database, back-end database, and the website. Okay, and which I find useful is actually a progress bar now, because some of the updates can be quite large. I mean, in this case, 183 meg. Again, depends on your broadband speed. And the final part, I did say this was a brief overview. Retention and disposition. Now, in the control panel at the bottom on the left, you'll see retention and disposition schedules. And the example I've got here is 4 year. So we're setting one up for 4 years. The first one is, what's the trigger? It defaults to upon creation. So essentially, we can assign retention and disposition schedules to folders and subfolders, so libraries or individual documents. The example I give, one of our infoRouter users in the UK is a law firm, and legally after 4 years they can shred paper documents that are client information or destroy them. I was told by one of them that if it still remains in electronic form or paper form after 4 years, then a judge can call on in court that information. But legally they can shred it or destroy it, so naturally they want to make sure that there's nothing incriminating on there. Okay, so upon creation, we're saying retain this document for 4 years. 4 years there. What happens after the 4 years? Well, you might have might want to dispose of the document. So you set a disposition schedule, and as you can see there, it's optional. What's triggering this disposition? Upon creation. So you create a document today, 4 years from today, the retention period ends, and that document, it isn't destroyed. infoRouter won't automatically be pruning and destroying documents, but it will notify a person. It may move it to a folder. So you may be subscribed to a folder called Dispose. So if anything goes into that folder, you're sent an email saying you must do something. In this case, it could be dispose, which means purge those documents from infoRouter. It might be export them. It might be moved to a third-party archiving. It could be anything, but it's out of the equation, so to speak. Okay, disposition trigger. Upon creation is obviously, well, tends to be the default one. So we create something today, 4 years time, the retention period ends, and then you dispose of it. In this case, upon cut-off, what that means is each document within infoRouter has a completion status. Now all it is a field where you can manually select anything from 10% to 100%. And the idea is when it's 100%, then that document is completed. It can't be added to or what have you. When it reaches that 100%, that's when this upon cutoff kicks in. So it might be I load it up today and it goes through a workflow process or an approval process, and it doesn't come out the end of that for 2 months. So if we set it for 4 years, it'd be 4 years from January the 12th. And upon retention end, it could be retain them for 4 years, keep them for 2 years after that, so it's 6 years in total, and then dispose of them. Okay, and this is I believe this is the final slide on here. What we're saying is if you go into the retention and disposition schedules, you can assign these to folders and subfolders, including or excluding documents. So again, a bit like the security that Ed covered earlier on, once you've set this up on a folder, you can virtually forget about it. So if you say, right, company policy is to retain these documents for 4 years. I think for tax purposes it's 6 or 7 years. We have some manufacturers using infoRouter that are producing components that they need to keep records for over 20 years. So each company's varies. It might be you're a company that the documents you've got in here you want to dispose of after 2 years, 1 year. But the flexibility is there to set up more than one of these schedules. And as Ed mentioned, you can set a 2-year one up, a 4-year, 5. These are really business rules that each of you will have different procedures based on that. Right, thank you. Questions? Anybody?
Just on that last point, you mentioned it sends an email out. I mean, in our business, haulage, we have probably proof of delivery documents. We must have 10,000 a week.
Yeah.
Probably want to keep those for 3 years and everything to be deleted. Is that possible without any user intervention?
Not as I know in the current situation. We didn't want to do this automatic deletion. With our formate, with those sites that have got formates and infoRouter, no, not even on that. No, it is moving it to a certain area. So I suppose if...
Is archiving the best way?
It is. A lot of sites will put things into year folders and then archive those off onto CD or simply purge them. I mean, again, the retention of the documents and the type of documents varies from industry to industry, because some industries will say, well, right, as soon as people have paid this invoice, then we can, or a proof of delivery, we want that deleted off the system. Most sites will want to keep it for a year or two just in case there's something, perhaps a court case where they've got to pull out the information and put it on there. But no, in the current one, it is moving it to a different folder. It could be in a different library that nobody can see, but then you would assign a system admin or a person to say, well, you've been subscribed on this library. When it notifies, it's your job to go in and delete that. Because it might be that you go in and one of your colleagues deletes it and you come in and want, at the last minute, perhaps you don't want to delete it, you want to retain it.
It sounds to me that archiving would be an easy way, but I've been looking at archiving recently, and I think I find it a bit cumbersome for someone else. Is there any plans to improve that?
Would you want to pick up on that one?
I did want to mention something that one of our customers, Qualcomm, does a lot with freight information, and they don't require the information for as long as you. In fact, they have a very strict 90-day time period in which once 90 days are up, actually their clients insist that those documents get deleted. And so what we did was using the web services API. They actually created a little routine that goes in there and deletes those documents automatically for you. So that would be one solution that I know that a customer uses to do that.
Okay, any questions?
I have a question on the licensing. Do you need a license for every user who accesses the system to look at the data? And if you do, are the licenses on a concurrent basis or on a named user basis?
Yes, to your first question, you should have a license for every named user. The reason being is that I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of audit reports that the system has so that it can tell you who's looked at what documents when certain tasks were. Once you start to get into, sharing user names and things of that nature, a lot of our features lose credibility. So you do need a license for each named user, and it is named, not concurrent users.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
We use infoRouter, and we store everything that you were saying by year, month.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a huge problem with the warehouse backing up the data, because we keep 7 years, and there's no way to differentiate between the years within the warehouse, so we have to back everything up every night. It'd be really handy if you could narrow that down, so we could take an archive copy of maybe the previous 6 years and only back up the current year each night, because the previous 6 years never change, and that's a big problem for us.
That's a case where we overthought a solution. What happens is when we designed infoRouter, we thought of it, we wanted it to be very scalable, so we put this load leveling algorithm in there that, I don't know if you've ever looked like behind the scenes at the warehouse there. You see all these numbers out there and it drives down tons of levels, and it really doesn't need to do that. What we have planned, but I don't have a target date because you're not the only customer that's asked us about this, is we're going to provide you with an option where we're going to use a simpler algorithm that's not going to create those levels, and that's what really slows down your backups to a large extent. So we are working on a solution, and we're going to try to attack it through that format by making the tool that you already have, your backup, work more efficiently.
Just on the solution, if you like, or the power of this infoRouter solution. I mean, you touched on Outlook as one of the things you can pull, if you like, emails and that type of thing. Does that include things like tasks, contacts, calendar entries as well? Is that all transferable into this?
No, it is the emails or their attachments.
Right, so it's just
within
purely
there.
email, not anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, because that would be something very useful to us to be able to, because we're developing things within Outlook throughout the range of its product and how
Right.
to use it. And calendar is one of the useful tools. That obviously, how we can link every member of and all the staff together, and how we arrange meetings and all the rest of it, and how that could then link in documents and various other things
No.
into a solution like this would be a useful step forward for us.
I think on the development side, it's really that duplication that Outlook does that bit. Where people tend to be using Outlook is that if they have an email that has some relevance to, for instance, a supplier invoice, your purchase order, you want the purchase order, the proof of delivery, the supplier invoice, and it may be an email. So one of our customers is a freight forwarder that ships around the world, and he may have a shipment under an airway bill that goes to Los Angeles, and he gets an email to say, don't send it to Los Angeles, send it to San Francisco. 3 months' time, they refuse to pay because you didn't deliver it where it was. Immediately you've got an email in infoRouter, along with all the rest of the documentation, saying, we shipped it to San Francisco because one of your colleagues, 2 days before shipment, told us to ship it to there. One thing I didn't touch on here, and it's quite powerful for a few of our sites, is where they have got documents. In some cases, when they've gone through something like Formate and produced file copies and they've gone into infoRouter, they create a file which they then import into their accounts or ERP system. And because you can access the discrete documents within infoRouter by a URL, there are a lot of pieces of software now, things like Navision, where you can embed links in that particular invoice page, for instance, which means that somebody looking at a Navision screen can click on a link to say, show the invoice, and it opens up in a browser as a PDF, that invoice. Those users, and I've been to a few of our sites where they're using it like that, those users are unaware that infoRouter's at the back end of it, driving it, because all they see is our account system, a hyperlink on that page, click on it, and the invoice appears in an Adobe Reader and a plugin in the browser. So that's something that can add value, and again, as I mentioned with infoRouter, that's there as standard. You've always been able to do that. I suppose the facility is, have you got a system where they can import, for instance, the purchase order number against a hyperlink, and embed it in their software. But I know sites that are using, I mentioned the Vision, they're using that. We're creating a CSV file that they upload every day, and it populates a hyperlink within their account software.
Cheers. On the Office side of things, which versions of Office are supported for the add-on?
2000 upwards.
Right, okay, right up to the latest.
Yes, 12, I think we've got it.
Yeah, I think
on
so,
12.
right?
Yeah, the latest
I'm
one
pretty
is-
sure that it is,
Yeah.
yes.
It's a slightly left field question. Have you got any customers that have implemented infoRouter in a hosted environment where they access their documents in the cloud or in a hosted environment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
In fact, we've got one partner here today.
that does that exactly.
That's
That's
his whole business model. I don't know where Rob is.
it's at the back there.
Yeah. And their whole business model is to sell infoRouter as a software as a service rather than an on-premise.
Yeah.
So
There's both.
I would say that Del Prito rule, 80-20, over 80% of our customers have infoRouter on an intranet and accessed across the company network.
Yeah.
But and a lot of them now are looking at, and some of them have implemented it, having infoRouter on a DMZ, so an area where you can securely access via the internet. So it's back to what I call self-service. If you're looking at a document, if somebody phones your organisation and you're looking at a document on the screen and saying, yeah, I've got a copy of it here, what's your email address, and send it, a lot of businesses are saying, well, hold on, can we give this screen to the person on the end of the phone? Because that saves us answering that. And if, for example, Tesco's wants to see a proof of delivery at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's a bit like most of us have with banks and building societies. We just expect, or utility companies, we just expect we can go to a website, log on, and if we want to download a PDF of the last month's statement or what have you, we don't. In a lot of cases, we don't expect that those documents to be posted to us or printed to us. And when I've discussed this with customers on scoping visits, that's the way the industry or the world tends to be going, and they fall into two camps. One, and giving you personal examples, one is Sky, which will say we'll stop sending paper invoices. If you want them, it's going to cost you £5 a year extra. To somebody like British Gas that's saying if you go paperless, we'll reduce your bills by £5 or £10 a year. I think with the larger companies it's easier, but most of the customers we deal with, which are sort of SME type companies, it tends to be, if our largest customer doesn't want to play this way, then we're not going to force them because they may go to our competitor. But a lot of what you'll see today is on the same theme, which is if it's paper, it costs money. Let's make it electronic, pass it around the company, deliver it to customers. Because once it's on paper, it's paper, it's toner, it's postage, it's handling, it's customers. Any
Yes, one more.
questions?
Going back to your comment about the original any ERP system and the hyperlink, could you actually embed into that as a wildcard search? For instance, if we were storing in infoRouter the quotes, the delivery notes, the pick notes for an order going out, and the invoice, the credit controller is sitting in discussing payment. Therefore, one click from there would actually bring all details of that document back if we've got all the documents in infoRouter.
Currently, it's just the separate hyperlink. So where that would work would be we can put a hyperlink to a folder. So if you had a folder for a particular customer or a transaction, but again, it's I know the question you're asking there, but currently no, because what we're looking at is discrete URLs. And as I said, some sites that are using it like that, if you said to their users, "Oh, you're using infoRouter," they would go, "No. Navision. Now you can click on that and it'll do this." It's an engine to drive it in the background, so to speak. But,
Again, you could accomplish it by developing an API to do that, where you could execute the search and then we could pass the information back to you.
Mhm.
You know, we could say, okay, here's the 3 documents that meet that criteria, and then you could go ahead and click on one of the documents, and then infoRouter would pass the details of the document
Mhm.
or the entire document to you.
And that API is public domain. So if you go to infoRouter.com/support, you'll see all the documentation for that API on there. And again, you can virtually do anything with that. What we've been going through this morning really is what you get in infoRouter out of the box. And I suppose the ways people have used that within organisation. Okay.
Can you handle Outlook PST files? Can you just import those in? 'Cause one area of vulnerability we have is a lot of people just say things on the local drive which doesn't get backed up.
Right.
We've had a couple of cases where we've had to go into sort of recovery mode and try and get stuff extracted off drives.
Not as such, no. Well, not specifically PST files. There is a utility that comes with infoRouter called Email Scanner, but that's very much runs as a service in the background, and that will pick emails up from POP3 mailboxes and put them into a specific space within infoRouter. So some sites will use Microsoft Exchange journaling for that, but this is the same thing. And again, I know sites that have put rules in place so that if you send an email to this address, Exchange is sitting there and saying, well, do a BCC to this, which happens to be a mailbox that infoRouter's polling. So there are variations, but a direct import of an Outlook PST file is not one of those. So okay, I think we might be
Yeah, I think I
finished on what we
talked
went
too
over
much, yes, I
slightly too
apologize.
much.
Oh,